right, so a Substack article went viral last week and it made a wild claim. The article argued that the real poverty line in America is not $31,000 a year, as the government suggests, but is instead now closer to $140K a year. Now, this sounds ridiculous until you start to look at what's actually happening in the modern economy. And this whole thing hit home for me when I had coffee with a friend a few days later. So he and his wife earn about $250K a year. They drive like 10-year-old Toyotas. They live in a normal house, 2 kids, nothing extravagant, and they're nearly $100,000 in personal debt. And if you knew these people, you would know this is not mismanagement. These are responsible, humble people. This is just a reflection of the basic cost of participating in adult life in a major metro or any nice pocket of the US between, childcare and healthcare and houses and taxes and student debt and all of it. So in this video, we're going to break down 6 data points that explain why you're not imagining feeling behind, including a structural shift in our economy in point 6 that almost no one talks about, but that completely explains why so many people feel stuck today, and just as importantly, what we can realistically do about it. So if you're new here, I'm Brendan. I used to advise top tech companies. Now I help professionals take control of their work and their income. Let's get right into finding one, which is the income illusion. Here's the first thing that explains why so many responsible adults feel behind right now. The numbers that we use to define middle class and high income no longer match the cost of living where actual jobs are. So let's start with some of the basics. According to the US Census Bureau, the median household income, which is the best measure versus the mean, right, is about $80,000 a year. And the US median home price is about $412,000. Historically, a median income family could afford a median priced home. But today, that math no longer maths. So let's look at the math. So an $80,000 household cannot safely afford a $412,000 home. That's a 5.1 income to home price ratio. And for most of American history, that ratio is somewhere between 2 and 3x. But here's where the whole thing gets even more disconnected from reality. Most knowledge workers or professionals do not live in median priced America. They live in major metros where income to cost mismatch goes from bad to impossible, right? We can look at San Francisco. Median home price there is 1.3 million. Los Angeles, it's 850K. Seattle, it's 830K. But this gets even more grim when kids enter the picture. So if we look at Realtor.com's 2025 school rankings, homes in top-rated school districts, which is an 8 out of 10 or higher, right? So not even top of the top, it's just, mainly, mostly the top. They had a median price of $1.21 million, which is 135% premium over the rest of the metro. So what can we learn from this? When we hear $83,000 a year is a solid middle class income, or we hear $150K a year is upper middle class, those categories are essentially being measured against national averages. But our lives are being billed at good school district prices. This is all being driven by major systemic shifts in our economy, which we're going to explore more in Finding 6. This mismatch between statistical middle class and then the lived reality of normal family life is why people earning 150K, 200K, 250K feel like they're doing everything right and they're still falling behind. And as we move into finding number 2, the picture gets worse because the cost of raising kids doesn't just compete with housing. In many cases, it now surpasses it. Finding 2, childcare has become a second mortgage. Here's the second reason that so many responsible adults feel behind. Childcare did not just get more expensive. It became one of the largest financial obligations in modern life, and in many cases, even bigger than people's mortgages. So if we look backwards from most of American history, childcare was not a market expense. There was one income, right? Someone stayed at home. And today, almost everyone needs 2 incomes just to meet the daily demands of life. And when you look closely, what you see is that the cost of that second income is largely wiped out by childcare. So here's the numbers. The average cost right now of infant care in the US is about $11,500 a year. However, that number is basically fantasy for the places where most professional jobs actually exist. Let's look at a couple of major metropolitan areas. In DC, it's about $24,000 a year. In Massachusetts, it's about $21,000 a year. In California, it's about $19,000 a year. And those are per child numbers. So for 2 kids in proximity to any major metropolitan area, the real bill is often somewhere between $40,000 and $50,000 per year in after-tax income. Now compare that to what somebody actually makes in a second job. Even if that's a $100K job, you're going to end up with like $75,000 a year after federal, state, and payroll and everything else taken out. And if you look at 2-kid childcare, you're looking at somewhere between 50 and 70% of that income disappearing. So we're in a position now where to afford modern life, you need 2 incomes. But then the cost of earning that eats most of that second income. Childcare is no longer just a line item. It is basically a second mortgage. And it is one of the core reasons that even high earning people still feel like they're running in place. If that feels discouraging, now let's look at the cost of just trying to remain not sick. Healthcare, the mandatory lifetime tax. All right, so here's the third reason so many high earners still feel financially fragile. Healthcare. Healthcare is not just expensive. It essentially, in a modern system, functions like a tax that you pay just for being alive. You pay for it before you're sick, you pay for it when you get sick, and you pay for it even after you get sick. So let's look back at history. For decades, employer health insurance was considered a benefit. And today, it is one of the largest expenses in a modern household budget. And every single January, by the way, it resets and increases in cost. So let's look at some actual numbers here. The cost of normal coverage. So the average employer-sponsored family health plan in America now costs about $24,000 a year. Workers pay about $6,500 a year out of pocket on average, and this is before they ever use their insurance. By the way, anybody who's actually had to use their insurance knows how wonderful that experience is. These are not premium plans. This is basic coverage that most working families rely on, right? And that most of these high income earning households now rely on. And what we see underneath that is that deductibles have then become a second price tag for this whole thing. Deductibles are the amount you pay just to even use the insurance, right? You have to pay before the insurance starts helping. And what we see is that KFF reports that family deductibles now sit around $3,000 on average, and it's often more like $5,000 to $7,000 in smaller companies. So a typical family is paying $6,500 just to have insurance, and then they're paying somewhere between $3,000 and $7,000 to actually use it, which means families are paying $10,000 to $13,000 a year, and this is before they get any meaningful help from insurance. And what we can see, and this goes back to point 6 that we'll get to in just a second, is that healthcare has outpaced wage growth for now 20 years straight. So from 2002 to 2024, wages increased about 75%, whereas family health premiums increased 240%. That is 3x higher than inflation. And what this does is it creates this silent emotional tax. Because healthcare is so expensive, millions and millions and millions of Americans every single year delay treatment. They hope problems go away. They self-diagnose. They avoid tests. They fear unknown bills. And by the way, this is just sick coverage. This is not the cost of actually optimizing your health or being well. So if this feels heavy, the next cost we're going to discuss, I think, is even more insidious, especially given the modern technology landscape. Because it doesn't just drain your wallet, which is of course important, but it also takes away the one non-renewable resource we have, and that's time. Finding number 4, the commute tax. So here's the fourth reason that modern professionals feel squeezed. The cost of earning money has quietly become one of the biggest expenses in modern life, and it's not just a financial cost. So I think most of us don't actually think of our commute as maybe part of our cost of living, but it actually affects every category. It affects our housing, our childcare, our transportation, and our stress, which is a major contributor to chronic disease. And the numbers show that it's never been as expensive as it is now. And this is on a multitude of factors. So the first is cars have never cost more than they do now. For millions and millions of Americans, driving is the only way that Americans can reach their jobs. And the price of basic transportation has hit historic highs. So the average cost of owning and operating a new car in 2024 is $12,000 a year. Car prices themselves are at record highs at $48,759, which is the average price of a new car. And used cars are not very far behind, $25,000 is about the cost of an average used car, according to Cox Automotive. And when we look at these cars, this is not luxury spending. These are vehicles that people buy just to get back and forth to work. It's the basic cost of life. And this is creating, we're going to explore this more in point 6, but Americans now have more auto debt than ever before. So the Federal Reserve Bank of New York reports that auto loan balances hit $1.62 trillion, which is the highest in U.S. history. And it's hard to contextualize just how big that balance is. When we look at monthly payments, they tell the same story. So $739 a month is the average new car payment, and almost 20% of borrowers pay over $1,000 a month. And when we look at the real situation for most families need 2 cars, right? Because they need to get to work. So transportation is eating now $20,000 to $24,000 a year of this. I mean, looking at the $30,000 poverty stat, it's no wonder that people are now saying $140,000 is really the minimum required to make it. Let's move away from money for just a second and talk about the tax that nobody measures here, which is in this cost, time. According to the Bureau of Transportation Statistics, the average American commute is now 27 minutes each way, and this is the longest that has ever been recorded. And this is in a world where remote work should be the standard, where there is more opportunity to connect than ever before. And if you do the simple math on that, what you see is 5 hours a week, 260 hours a year, which is over 6 full work weeks of your life every year, just getting back and forth to work. I used to know a guy in LA who commuted 2 hours each way from Agoura to downtown. You do the math on that, it's 4 hours a day, it's 20 hours a week. That's a year and a half of his life getting from his house to his office instead of Zoom. That is not living with his family. It's not building anything for himself. It's just getting to the place to make money. Finding 5. Even high earners now live paycheck to paycheck. So here's the 5th reason that so many folks feel like they're falling farther and farther behind. The paycheck to paycheck crisis is no longer just a low income problem. It now affects people earning 6 figures and even multiple 6 figures, and the data behind this is pretty shocking. So according to Lending Club, 44% of Americans earning over $100,000 a year live paycheck to paycheck, and 51% of earners making $150,000 to $200,000 live check to check. And the report, by the way, notes that millions and millions of households earning above that $200K number also report the same financial fragility. Half of 6-figure earners, half. What we see here is not rampant irresponsibility, it's systemic fragility. It's a shift in a detachment between what it costs to make and what you actually earn to make it. This is not about too many lattes. It's not about personal discipline. It's the math of modern life, which, by the way, is entirely explained by the shift that we'll explore in just a second in Finding 6. So when your fixed costs include school district housing, $20,000 to $50K in childcare, $24,000 in health insurance, $12,000 to $24,000 in transportation, higher taxes as you make more money, student loans, inflation, it is entirely possible to earn $150,000 or $200,000 or $250,000 and still feel like you are one emergency, one bill, one misstep away from big trouble. And I think that the emotional part of this is something that people don't measure. They feel like they're the only ones struggling. And I want to make it clear that these numbers show us that the system is the issue. It is not you. Which brings us to Finding 6, which is the most important and illustrative issue of all. So Finding 6, the structural shift that no one talks about. So here is the final and the most important insight of this video. Your parents lived in a wage-priced world. We live in an asset-priced world. And almost no one explains what that actually means. So for most of US history, the major costs of life, housing, education, healthcare, were priced for people who earn wages. But what we've seen is over the last 40 years, those same categories instead became tied to credit markets and institutional buyers, investor demand, financial engineering, and long-term leverage. And what that means in simple layman's terms is that life's biggest expenses are basically now priced like financial assets. But most people still earn like workers. And this mismatch is the root cause of why life feels so much harder, even at high income levels. So here are the three clearest examples of this. First of all, housing now tracks asset prices, not wages. So from 2000 to 2024, home prices are up 121%, while wages during that period are up only 22%. The gap doesn't come from greed or demand alone. It's systemic. It's cheap credit, it's 30-year mortgages, it's investor buying, it's institutional ownership, financialization of the housing market. Basically, these assets stop being priced as shelter. They're priced as levered assets. And we're going to talk about this in another video too, that there's also, I'll link it at the end if it's published, or look out for it. Now, there are other factors to this that we're going to talk about in an upcoming video as well. This isn't the whole story, but this is a huge and important part to understand. The second place we can look is healthcare is now tied to corporate pricing power and insurance reimbursements, not paychecks, right? Premiums are up more than 240% since 2000, while wages grew a fraction of that. And we can see the same thing with cars, right? Cars are now priced off financing terms, not incomes. The average new car is nearly $50,000. So life is priced for people who benefit from leverage, while people earn in a system that offers none. This is why I'm always saying you either have leverage or you are someone's leverage, because your income stays wage priced, where expenses become asset priced. So what do we actually do about this? Here's the part that I think many people overlook. You already have leverage. Your judgment, your skill set, your ability to solve non-obvious problems, but you're selling it through a wage-based system. You are using your leverage in its weakest possible form. You are trading supposed security in exchange for dramatically reduced earning capacity. So the shift for me is very simple, and it's this. Stop getting paid for your time and start getting paid for the value of the result you can create. And this can sound ambiguous, but it isn't. Here's a simple way to think about this. Pick a single problem you're good at solving that others ask you about. Create a process to help other people solve it, and then charge based on value, not based on time. You are already selling this exact expertise to your employer, so stop giving them leverage and start creating your own. You do not need a big company. You do not need investors. You do not need 10 or 50 or 100 employees. You just need one lever that is going to move you out of these wage price dynamics. And it's also worth recognizing that with the internet and with modern leverage, we are also in the period of time right now that for those who take advantage of this and see the economy for what it is, the ability to earn more with more freedom on your own terms has never been more available to more people than it is right now. Once you understand this shift from wage price to asset price, and you start to look at your life through the lens of leverage, the whole economy suddenly makes sense, and it also explains why you feel behind and why working harder at your job will never get you off of this treadmill. So if any of this feels uncomfortably true, the takeaway is not that you're failing, it's just that you're operating inside an economic structure that your income wasn't designed for. All right, so next steps. If you want to go deeper into these ideas, I will leave a couple of videos here that expand on these ideas. There are also two ways that I support people in making this shift. The first is the Freelance Formula, which is a self-paced system. The second is the positioning sprint, where we work together to build your offer, your story, and your pricing power. The links are below if you want to explore more. And with that, if you enjoyed this, please like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.